Good evening. It's nice to see that you found your way from the regular Benet's rooms over here to Phillips Auditorium. I'm sure that you'll find, as our presenter shows his images this evening, that it is worth the trek to be able to get the better darkness and visual presentation. It's been pointed out to me that I keep forgetting to introduce myself at these, and so I just wanted to briefly do that. My name, for those of you who I haven't met face-to-face, some of you I only know virtually now via UC 150, my name is Elaine Arnold, and I am a medieval historian here at Ohio Wesleyan University, but I'm also an environmental historian, which is where my research passion lies. And relevant for tonight, also a photographer, and very interested in the connections between art and artistic representation and the ways that people both today and in the past, come on in, both today and in the past connect with their natural worlds through cultural expression. I've loved having the opportunity to put together this year's Sagan National Colloquium series. It's a wonderful challenge to try to assemble, and it gives me the chance to introduce campus to people whose work I admire. I've been, along with many of you who are already here, delighted to welcome new people to campus, to meet them for the first time and to introduce Ohio Wesleyan to them. But tonight, it's my great pleasure to welcome a returning guest, John Sabraw. I met John last year when he was one of the exhibiting artists at the Ross Museum. I was immediately struck by the vibrancy and energy of his work, and by the ways that he challenged his viewers to engage with unusual views of aspects of the natural world, from floating leaves to river deltas and mine tracings. John's work emphasizes the beauty and complexity of the natural world. He forces us to see textures, to rethink scale, and to connect the minute and intimate to the larger systems, places, and perspectives we're confronted with. In addition, John is an activist and an environmentalist. He works to run a sustainable artist workshop and to make his art practices echo his environmental ideals. Art has power. When John spoke to the art department last year, I was struck by the vividness not only of his art, but also of his ideas about the role of art in environmental awareness and activism. I'm delighted that he agreed to come back to OWU to share with all of you his artistic practices and philosophy. Before I have you welcome him on stage, I want to tell you about how this evening will go. It will be slightly different than normal in addition to the different venue. Instead of our regular public question session, we're going to stop when John is done with his presentation, take a brief intermission, and reconvene over at Beagley Library, where his current exhibition, Resonance, is on display in the main floor gallery. There will be light refreshments and the chance to view the art and speak with John in a less formal setting. So I encourage you all to follow us over to Beagley at the end of the talk. So thank you very much. John?
Thanks. Is it possible to get these cans, can these be turned down here? The lights right here? Can we make this all dark, the whole stage? Okay, thanks. Thank you. Thank you for coming, everyone. This is indeed an honor for me. Last year I was here, which was really fun. Yeah, that's great. No, it's perfect, actually. This is even better, because honestly, I'm not important.
You don't need your lines?
No, I don't need notes. I don't need anything. Justin Kronwetter, who is the director of the Ross Museum, actually, he spotted my stuff a long time ago, and last year, after a couple of years of sort of slightly arguing back and forth about what was going to be displayed, he gave me a show at the Ross Museum, which was really great, and I was really grateful for it. And from him, I've met a lot of different people, and was a part last year of meeting a lot of people as a part of the Sagan National Colloquium, which I thought was very, very fantastic. So I'm here. I'm glad to be here. and this is probably going to be a little bit unusual. If you have questions or weirdness or anything, don't raise your hand. I cannot see you. But feel free to yell out. This is totally like not one of these things where you're going to throw me off my game. There is no game. This is going to be very lucky if I make it to the end without vomiting, so it'll be good. So yell out things if you want it. That's fine. Heckling is fine too, but I'm really good at coming back at you, so just be ready. Hopefully there's no children in the audience, just hopefully. So this is kind of in 3 parts. So the first part is a little bit biographical because I think it's only fair that you know a little bit about me and a little bit about where I come from and what shapes what I'm interested in work, a little bit of my artwork. And then I want to take you into the second section, which is really going to be more about the environmental aspects of my work, and particularly the project that I've been doing with a lot of environmental engineers recently involving the remediation of coal polluted streams and using that pigment to actually create art with and things that you need. And then I want to wrap it up with basically a kind of sort of an ill-formed ending where I have a lot of things I've been thinking about and I'm going to unleash them on you as my unwilling victims. And feel free to respond to that or whatever else. There's no real conclusion there as much as sort of things I've been thinking about, and I want to rather evilly put them inside your head too, So John Sabraw is my name. It's a fake name. Sabraw is actually basically the thing that the people in immigration wrote down when my drunken, illiterate Canadian farmer ancestors came to America, and they were like, "What's your name?" And they're like, "Okay, Sabraw." So there's like 12 of us. So if you see anybody else with the name Sabraw, they're pretty much related, and you should probably avoid them altogether. So eyeballs from hell. If you've met me, you know that actually my eyes are sort of like a chameleon's. They go in all different directions. They do what they want. They don't talk to each other. They don't get along. They've been, by law forced to segregate and everything else. And I was born that way. The doctors slapped what they thought was a chameleon, and that was me. And so from an early age on, I didn't have the same experience of the universe as anybody else. I had these giant glasses, and at 18 months old, they did surgery on my eyeballs. So literally, I could see like tiny little individual aphids on a leaf, and I could see stars that no one else can see in the night sky, which made my parents suspect my mental awareness. And everything else in between was very hard for me. People were hard, dogs were hard, cars were really hard to avoid, apparently. And so this colored how I approach the universe. I think that I've always really felt that the universe is a very fascinating place, but that clearly when I discuss what I think about my place in the universe to other people, maybe I'm not, the norm, so I get a lot of looks. Was naturally led to an artist's life because of that. Now, when I was growing up, I grew up on military bases. My father was Air Force. It was the Vietnam era, so those of you who know your history, that was 1920s. And basically, I spent a lot of time going like, yeah, oh shit, And that was kind of like life. And my dad was flying planes and dropping bombs, and we're like, Dad's a hero. And everybody's like, Vietnam's bad. And you're like, Dad's bad. What the, oh, shaw. So from an early age, I spent a lot of time going like, oh my God, what is my place in the universe? What is important? What can I do? I mean, people are dying. People are burning themselves up. My dad's dropping bombs and stuff. I don't know. It was very confusing to me, right? So this colored, I think, as I moved along into becoming an artist, that this was my struggle in life. That the basic thing was, how was I actually going to figure out the universe and figure out my place in it if I didn't really have a stable place to connect from, So other humans, this is important. I barely graduated high school, just barely, .001, GPA. And I went to Pratt Institute in New York, in Brooklyn. I bought a ticket on an airplane when I was 17. I'd never been to New York, and this was before cell phones or Google Maps or GPS or anything like that, so I just had a place to go to. And there's a lot of other people in New York. I don't know if you know that. It's like a city. It's like a lot of people there. So when you go there, you're confronted almost immediately with lots of other cultures and things. And my reaction to it was to try to figure out all these other cultures. So I made a lot of very violent images when I first went to New York at undergrad. Things like this, to the extent that basically, after my first semester, 3 professors got together and wrote me a letter that said I was forbidden to use the color red in my work anymore. But when I graduated, I actually created a children's book, and somehow, miraculously, this got published, which is quite funny. I mean, it's really very funny. It's a piece of crap book. And in fact, if you go on Amazon, those of you who are playing with your phones in the back and lighting up your faces, basically, if you go on Amazon, you can find this for like 1 cent. The shipping will kill you, but you can get it for 1 cent. And there's reviews on there, which is like, I wouldn't use this for a coaster. You know, it's pretty good. If I hear a lot of laughter from the back row, I know you guys are like actually reading the reviews on Amazon. But the thing that this did for me is like, I got a degree in illustration. The idea was I was supposed to go out and meet people and they would be like, we want a dog that looks like this. And as an illustrator, my job was to go, here's a dog that looks like that. And instead I'd be like, here's a dog, but it has snake skin instead. And they'd be like, that's not working. So when this came out, it was very scary for me. I was like, oh, I should be a children's book author. And I really suck at children's books, I really do. You can ask my daughter. I'm like, yeah, he sucked. So anyway, basically, a friend of mine was like, oh, well, okay, the publisher wanted me to do this little like publicity tour where you go to bookshops, you know, and they're like, you sit there with a stack of books no one wants to buy, and then you're supposed to sign them for the 4 people that actually know you and buy, you know what I'm talking about, yeah? No? Okay, well, that happens. So one of my friends was like, listen, I volunteer at this shelter out in Queens, and it's a homeless shelter, and we have this group of teenagers, and they got no future, they didn't know what the hell they're gonna do. Can you come out and talk to them about how you were a teenager and you got your children's book published at 19? And I was like, yeah, sure, I'd like to teach everyone everything. And I go to the shelter and I walk in the room, and the second I walk in the room I realize I can't teach anybody nothing, man. These are irascible kids. These are street kids. These are kids that are homeless, man. They're hardcore. And they're just sitting there and they're staring at me like, what do you got? You got nothing. You got nothing, you know? And I didn't have anything, you know? I had this. I drew some crappy drawings, kid with a stick, you know? But I told them about the process, and in talking to them about the process, they told me about them, and this really crazy thing happened where I really felt that I actually, in the end, did have something to offer them. And I'm still not exactly sure what it was, but at the end of it, I had that magical feeling that, because I remember one girl, when I first walked in, she was like just dissing me. She was really like, she really didn't like me. And I understand, you know, I mean, it's me. But like at the end of it, she was like, well, I'm gonna do my book, and Malcolm Jamal Warner's gonna come out opening, and and it was like blah, blah, and there was all this conversation, all this energy, and I was like, yes, you know. It's like it did something, oh my God, you know, other than get up and take a crap, you know. So that was exciting, and that's when I first realized, okay, maybe I should just go out there and be myself, which is like a shocking revelation to like a 19-year-old kid, you know. Well, anyway, to me, I was very immature. So, you know, I was like, oh my God. And so what I did actually is I bought a car. I bought a car for $500, and it was a 76 Caprice Classic. It had a 454 cubic inch truck engine in it, so it went really, really fast, which is important when you're on the Bonneville Salt Flats, because at midnight, you know the Bonneville Salt Flats where they do the land speed records, and they tell you, you know, they do. So when I was out there, we got up to 195. It was very, very fun. And then we spent the next 4 hours pulling salt from the underside of the car so it wouldn't rust into a heap. But I spent 40 days in the car and 40 nights in it, living out of the car, driving around the West, put about 11,000 miles on the car, and figured out that yes, I actually can't do anything. I should be an artist. So that's what happened. And so I went back to school to actually get a BFA degree, because apparently this is required. And I did paintings like this where it was just about that size, and I'd stretch canvases and put them on the floor, and I'd get on a ladder and I'd pee all over the canvas and stuff, and then put other things in there and things I can't discuss, and you know, and they'd make these paintings, and it was all about like, yeah, I'm an artistic genius or whatever. But then I got really interested in looking deeper into things and really sort of investigating things at a much deeper level. So I started investigating alchemists and the Hermetic. You know the Hermetics, the people that would sit around and like sort of think about like deep little things and come up with reasons that the universe existed in the way it did. So I got really back into trying to figure out like, if I could only look a certain way, if I could see a certain way, maybe I could figure out what it is I'm supposed to do. Maybe I could figure out how to do life right, you know? So I would do a lot of things where I would mess with perception, like over here, this drawing, ooh, it kind of works. You guys see that laser pointer in the back? Back row, pants guy, can you see this? Yeah. Okay, good. So basically, like this is a drawing, it's 9 inches by, it's really tiny, it's like that big. And basically you draw something that's totally distorted, then over here you take this cylinder, which is actually a mirrored cylinder, and you place it in the middle, and then this reflects back into it, into a pyramid and a medallion and a little origami crane. I'm sure it meant something very important at the time. I did a lot of copies of Dutch artists. These are 2 paintings. These are tiny, tiny paintings, 8 inches by 6 inches or something else, with objects that I felt somehow, I collected a lot of objects. I was hoarding like dead things and all kinds of stuff because I felt that actually, if I could figure out what they really had to say, then maybe that was like uber important and I would find something that no one else could find. It was very, very, very deep. But I didn't really find anything. But these two paintings actually sold in Chicago when I was young. And so I decided that I was a badass artist and I should move to Chicago immediately and become incredibly famous. Whereupon no one bought anything, so that's what happens usually. So I went to graduate school into Northwestern University where I studied my master's. And basically, I started painting weird things. I started looking at the life around me and trying to decide, is there something here that's going to give me a clue as to what I should be doing? You know, I was pretty deeply involved in this thing. And the basic answer from all my professors was, no, you're untalented and you're pathetic. You know, like in a normal, usual beginning situation with a professor. So I went into my studio and I said, well, yeah, then I'm just going to paint duct tape, man. And so I went in the studio and I painted, this is tiny, this is like actual size duct tape. So I painted this little oil painting of duct tape. And they were not impressed. So I said, all right, that's it. So I painted this painting, which is about 18 inches by 20 inches. And what I painted was I painted a painting of the actual duct tape on the wall. And then I painted also in there the painting that I painted on this, of the painting of the duct tape that was on the wall. And then, for my critique, I took a piece of duct tape and I put it on my pants and I got all this stuff on it and I put it over this and they were like, we don't like simulacra, realism is dead, you are still a moron. And I was like, oh yeah, and I ripped off that piece of duct tape and I was like, eat that motherfucker, you know. So I have no friends left from grad school, but basically, what began to happen at that point is I started thinking about the objects I was collecting, the things I was painting. And when I started the show in Chicago professionally at Thomas McCormick, I started to take these tiny little things and really try to see if there was something deeper in there. Was there something else I could get out of it? So these are, again, tiny, tiny, tiny oil paintings. So there's like a shell and a snake bone. I'm sure that means something. This is actually like, this is kind of funny because I had the opening of this in Chicago and then this wonderful, lovely elderly woman came up. We had this great discussion about how red it was and how labial it was and vaginal and wet and sexual and fantastic. And I was like, God, you really get art. You're so awesome. And she goes, yeah, what's that pin? And I said, I don't know. I just found it on the ground. She goes, well, I can tell you what it is because I have one. It's a Girl Scout pin. So that was the last time I picked up random things off the street and pretended they were important. I owe that woman like a ton of money for that. I was like, oh my God. So I try to do other things. This is a little bit out of focus, so it's disappointing. But nonetheless, basically, this is a piece of broken glass. I tried to imbue like all these struggles I had where I'm trying to figure out, okay, what is the universe? Why am I here? Why is the universe there? What am I supposed to be doing? Because I'm just like dicking around all day long. What do I do? I'm supposed to do something important, aren't I? And so I would collect things again, and I would paint them, and I would try to get them to sort of embody all these bigger ideas I had that were way too big, you know, way too big to fit into something that small. And this was titled Oppie's Vishnu, which is like, you know, about Robert Oppenheimer. You know, that famous quote when they actually watched the atomic blast for the first time, and he said that it reminded him of the Bhagavad Gita, where Vishnu is trying to get the prince to do his bidding. And so he takes on the many-armed form, and he tells the prince, I am become death, shatterer of worlds. And that Robert Oppenheimer felt like that at the moment that the atomic bomb went off. So this is a piece, this is one of my favorites. I showed this last year as well. This is about 30 inches by 38 inches, so it's also not so big. And this is called In Remembrance of the First Time I Learned That the Universe is Infinite. And this is kind of like that time when you're a kid and your dad like takes you out with that little telescope and is showing you the stars at night. He's making up the names of constellations and stuff, you know. The Miller Lite cluster, boy. You know, okay, Dad. You know. And they tell you that thing for the first time where they're like, you know, the universe is infinite. And you're like, yeah. And they're like, do you know what that means? Not a clue. It's like, yeah. It means that the universe goes on and on. You're like, well, that's cool because I love stars. And those shooting stars are even like better. And they're like, no, son, you don't understand. It's just empty blackness that goes on forever and ever and ever. And so if you're me, you cry yourself to sleep and you make a painting out of it when you're 20. You know? So this is actually, it's all oil paint. And then in the middle here, there's about 150 layers of different colors. And then I used 2,000 grit auto body sandpaper and water, and I sanded it to a mirror finish. So when you actually stand in this, your reflection comes back at you. So it's like a big spooky painting, which I like. And there's a detail of it. It's about 2 inches. This is about 2 inches of the painting. And this is Otto. He's a headless beetle. But in New York, there's this great place on 77th called Mandible and Maxilia. And like, you know, it's one of those places where they have all those preserved insects and stuff. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yes? No? Yes, back row, yes? Thanks. So, basically, no. Okay, well, figure some things out. Okay. So the thing is this. If you go in the back and you talk to the guys that get paid minimum wage to like soak things in formaldehyde, they're always screwing something up. So you can get really screwed up beetles for like 50 cents. Just to let you know, that high-priced stuff in the front, that's for rich people. The stuff in the back, that's for you. Okay? Anyway, so this is a painting, and it's oil. So, okay, high anxiety, which is sort of like the whole theme, obviously, so far, but let's just pretend it starts anew now. So high anxiety is like, I left grad school, I was showing in Chicago, I got a job teaching at Washington University in St. Louis, which was fantastic, and I had the baby. Well, technically, I didn't have a baby, I stood there and watched my wife have a baby, which emasculates you like in a second. You realize your equipment is pretty useless compared to like a woman's equipment. You're kind of like, I can't do nothing. And maybe that's a discussion for later. Again, I hope there's no children here. So this is a painting. It's about 8 feet tall, 5 feet wide. This is my daughter, Isabella. So she hates this painting because it's her butt, right? But she's like 2.5, and she's all like kids. Like all kids are like, yeah, and they run out in the street, and you're like, no, there's a truck. And they're like, yeah, and they run into knives, and you're like, no, you know, right? So there's this giant high anxiety where first you're thinking about yourself and your place in the universe and your girlfriend and other kinds of things, and then you got this baby, and then you're like, oh, you know, and you're trying to figure out like, how do I not kill this thing, for one thing? I mean, seriously, this thing's like rigging around, it's crying, you haven't slept in 4 days, and you're like, does it like breast milk? Does it like steak? What does it do? You know, some of you know what I'm talking about, right? You're freaked out that first, you're like, oh. So then there's this other thing where they get a little bit older, and you have to let them go. You actually have to like, you know, they're crying, and you're like, no, go away and do things. And you're like, oh, and you know, so your soul melts and leaks out of your shoe and that kind of thing, you know? So this painting's about like the shoe melting, you know, the soul melting out of your shoe kind of thing. It's a Grand Canyon, you know, and it's kind of like, oh. And this is her about to go out in the big world, and this is me being like, no, don't go. Okay, go, you know. So sometimes we need mentors. I wanted to show you Robert Brawley. This is a painting. It's 2 feet by 3 feet, oil on panel. This is one of my great mentors, Robert Brawley. And the reason I show this is because at this time when I'm like, I have a baby, and you know, and I'm like, I'm teaching and I'm ruining young minds in a classroom, and I have a baby and I'm ruining the baby, you know, he comes out and he's this great teacher, and he's like, he actually has traveled to South America with like, you know, with the tribes, and he's imbibed in all those, you know, wonderful hallucinogenic narcotics, you know, and he comes back and tells stories and things. He's really like he really is a shaman for me, you know? And so he'd always be like, Bob, dude, I'm like freaking out, I'm screwing up and everything. And he'd be like, oh, John, you're so tightly wound. And I'd be like, oh, okay. So he'd loosen me up and everything. And this is basically right before he died. He died early of cancer, unfortunately, but he let me paint this portrait of him. I think it's the only portrait anybody else has ever painted of him, which makes me very proud. And this is, the title is really long, but basically it's based on a story that Bob would always tell. Because when he imbibed in these narcotics, he would basically get to the place where he would feel in his sleep that right at this moment he was like right at the edge of discovering nirvana, like just right there. And he'd be like, yes! And he'd reach for the gate and he'd be like, nirvana! And then right when he opened the gate, boom, no, he'd wake up. But he wouldn't wake up in his bed. He'd wake up in the lobby of purgatory naked, except for laurel leaves around his head, passing out mints. So, and this is a close-up of the eyeball. I was really into details back then. I was like, yeah, it's got to go in. That's got to go in. Like 4 days on that highlight. It's got to go in. You're like, I can't even see it. Sure you can. Anyway, so I was like, okay, I got to examine myself then. I got to start examining myself. So in my studio in St. Louis, when I was teaching at WashU, I built this 500-gallon tank. You can always tell it's an artist studio because like the house is smaller than the studio, you know, just so you know. And there's no safety gear. So I filled this tank up with water from the hose, obviously, next to an electric heater that's plugged in with cords on the floor. Yes, I know. And then I got in it, and I had this rig on that platform I built, and I had this 4x5 camera, and I took all these pictures of myself. And let me tell you what, water from a hose in March, it's really cold. I'm just saying. So I didn't actually do a full-length portrait because there was like legitimate shrinkage going on and stuff. Maybe that was sharing too much. Anyway, so, but seriously, I mean, that nipple was like a friggin' diamond. So at this point, things started to shift just a little bit. You can see this little leaf here. I was like, oh, I'll put a leaf, because actually I took a bunch of stuff from the gutter and threw it into the tank, and then I put, you know that kid's tub dye? I put like a ton of that in there, so it was all blue and weird, and I was stained for days. It was a good thing. So this whole series was kind of about me and Robert trying to figure out things, and me trying to figure out what I was supposed to do in life. Was I doing it right? Was I doing anything worth a damn? You know, and so here's me drowning. There's water like going into my mouth and nose and stuff and everything, which did happen. I did choke quite a bit. And so all the stuff from the gutter, these leaves start showing up, and they start showing up again and again. This is a painting I also made a couple of years later. These are a little bit fuzzy, so it's unfortunate, but we'll go next door and you can actually see the paintings in real life. They're kind of cool. This is about 4 feet tall by like something wide. And these are my hands, and this is me starting to really get into like, okay, look. Okay, I got the baby thing figured out. She's still alive. That's important. You know, I'm sort of not selfish anymore. I'm starting to look outwardly. I'm starting to think about the future. Like if I want to have something for my kid when she gets older, if I want to make a world that I want her to live in, what am I going to do? What do I have to do, right? So I started contemplating things that were really maybe more of an external contemplation. I started doing, these are about 12 inches by 12 inches, very small. I started painting things that were dying and things that had big, like infinite expanses in the back and things. And that led me to look at things and examine them really deeply in a very systematic kind of way. So in the systematic sense, you know, I still have a deep, deep love for the alchemists and you know, the hermeticists, and I actually still sort of think like someone has lost the recipe to turn lead into gold, and it's still there, and somehow I can buy like a really good car, you know. Somebody laughed, so you know what I'm talking about, right? This, like, right at night, you're like, somebody's got to have the recipe. I need some gold. Where can I get some gold? You know. No, just me. Okay, that's cool. So, these hermetic guys, they're like, you know what? Look at the trees. Trees have like all this stuff in it, and they can tell us everything about the universe. There's just got to be a tree. Look at the tree. Look to the tree. You know, it's like Jerry Seinfeld. Look to the cookie, right? And basically, so then you start looking at the things we're doing now, at all the science, at all these things that we build. Fantastic. All these tree structures, all these things that start to have this relationship, and I'm like, yeah, I'm totally into it. So I start going off on this stuff. I start going to botanical gardens. I start painting all kinds of little trees and bushes and things that look like neurons. I start painting, I was stranded in Barnes & Noble parking lot at like 1 o'clock at night, and I was like wondering what to do, and this turned into a great painting. So you can find art anywhere. I'm just, you know. I don't know if Barnes & Noble really is an art place anymore, but just for that night, it was good. So you start looking at bark, and you start breaking things down. This is about 14 inches tall. These are all oil paintings. This is 8 feet long, 4 feet tall. And basically, this is actually a painting of a tree at night at an intersection, but I thought it looked like, you know, the basal ganglion, and I thought it looked like neurons and things, and I'm like, yes, I'm getting at something. This is fantastic. And here's this telephone pole, because, you know, people are always messing with you. So here's your brain, and here's like technology messing with your brain and stuff, just like you with the unicorn booty in the back. So this is a cherry bark. It's a little bit out of focus. I just put this in here because someone here has this, and I think that's really cool. It's one of my favorite paintings. Anyway, so yes, painting barks, giant cracks in it. These cracks look just like the other things, and this is going to show up later. Or this painting, which is about 36 inches by 24 inches tall, this is oil on panel, and this is a painting I made with a new method that I had used to create this kind of super hyper texture where the blue is. It's really textured, and you can't really see that here, but later on you'll see an example. And this is actually a painting of a satellite image that was taken when the Colorado River actually used to reach the Bay of California, which it no longer reaches. I mean, I really got interested in these kinds of things. I began to think about these larger systems, and I'd always been an activist, I had always been an environmentalist, I had always been concerned, and I began to shift to sustainability as a focus, primarily because when you write letters to the newspaper and other things about political stuff, you get hate mail back, and you get a lot of it. I got like buckets of hate mail, and I began to become a little bit afraid for my family. So I decided that maybe picking isolated political issues wasn't necessarily the best way to make change in the world. That maybe the best way was to look at something that was a little bit more universal, something that affected more people. So I began to look at sustainability and environmentalism. Of course, it affects everything. It affects everything you do. It's the cause of most wars. It's the cause of most hate. And we can discuss that later if you want to. So I actually got this incredible lucky opportunity. I got a grant, and I began working with a couple of astrophysicists, Mangala Sharma and Tom Statler, which, by the way, last week, Tom Statler just got an asteroid named after him, which is very cool. Because like he's an asteroid guy, so it's like, yeah, you know, it's like, I don't know. It's like dude in the back with the shorts, like getting shorts named after you. I don't know, maybe. Although slightly more celestial. So this is a project called Scale, and it was really about bringing humans into a museum setting. This is at the Kennedy Museum of Art and other multiple locations, where people could come in and they could actually get a sense of themselves in relationship to the universe. So this front room here, this is actually a drawing This is a giant black drawing in a room, and it's actually hung on canvas, and it stretches all the way around the room, so it surrounds the whole room when you're in there. And there's this little tiny cube in here. It's a little centimeter cube. This is us making the drawing. It was 85 feet long and 10.5 feet tall, and we used 2,000 sticks of charcoal and this abandoned warehouse, which is really awesome. This guy let us have it. And so the drawing was the front room. You walked into the next room, and you had this, which was a 12.5-foot diameter light box. And these arrangements of stars here are an arrangement of stars that happens on a mountaintop in Chile, very specifically. And when the Hubble looked through that, it saw this stuff on the back side. And here's some kids like playing around with it, which was awesome. So you can get a better sense of the scale at the opening. And see these curtains behind these people? This is pretty interesting. We actually, with the astrophysicists, which is really funny, because when I work with scientists, this is the first time, I mean, I love science, but like, you know, no good at it. I'm just not. That's why we have scientists, because they're good at it. That's why they're scientists. So you work with scientists, and you walk into a room, and you're like, I want like a bunch of curtains, and they're all going to be like really orange. And they're like, why? I'm like, well, because they're going to be made of stars. And I wanted to have 1 billion stars printed and visible in one room so that you could walk in and understand what the heck a billion felt like, you know? And the scientists were like, yeah, we can't do that. I was like, well, why not? They said, oh, well, because our colleagues would laugh at us because the natural background color of stars is actually blue. And I was like, yeah, I don't care. I want it to be cool. And I want it to be like a church, like you walk in and it's, oh, you know, and you feel like you have to go to confession for whatever you did that day. So they were like, no, we can't do that. And I was like, no, it's art. You can do it. It's okay. It's okay. You can do it. And so then once they realized, like, okay, this wasn't going to be seen as a specific science, you know, learning situation, that it was actually going to be more about an art situation, the doors came off, and they were so fun and so generous and spent all their time writing code. Like there wasn't this thing. So they generated the code to actually generate random stars, to actually somehow communicate with these other 5 computers and then print out 1 billion randomly generated stars. None of the stars are the same. This isn't a repeated print. There are 1 billion randomly generated, placed, printed stars in the room. And then we passed out magnifying glasses, especially for the kids, because like, you know, she's got one in her hand there, so they could actually see the little individual stars. So everybody was like, oh, 1 billion is too big. And we're like, yeah. And then they looked at this image, which is the Hubble image, the first Hubble ultra deep field. And this is the image of it, basically. And it's like this big, you know. And actually, if you stood outside and you took a poppy seed from a poppy seed bun and you held it up to the night sky, that's pretty cool. Look at that. That was great. Okay. That was like perfect. You couldn't even like plan that better. It was awesome, a little orange light. So if you hold this up and you look at the night sky through a poppy seed, that's the size of this picture in the night sky. And those are 25,000 galaxies hidden by a poppy seed. So when this image came back, all the scientists were like, yeah, we're going to have to do some recalculations. You know? Here's a close-up of the lower. If you look at this lower right corner down here, these are not stars. These are all galaxies. Every one of these is a galaxy. And every one of these galaxies has hundreds of millions to trillions of stars in it. So there really are more stars in the heavens than there are grains of sand on the ocean beaches, which is very poetic, and I love that. So this is the kind of thing that Scale was about, but also for me, it was really about connecting with people. Over here, this is Seth Shostak, and he's the head of the Center for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and I made him draw on our drawing. So like the extraterrestrial guy like actually drew on our drawing, so I'm very, okay, that was cool to me. Anyway, so, and this is Mangala Sharma, and there's Tom Statler, and here's this whole crew of people that I worked with, and I was gonna bring this video. There's a lot of curse words in it because it's like the kids, but we worked in here for 4 months straight, and we had to build this barrier here. See these like signs over here? We had to build this barrier because the other guy kind of got ticked off that we weren't paying rent, so they decided to have a gun show in the same space that we were doing a giant drawing. So this caused a big fight, and on the first day, the guy unsnapped his holster and pulled a .45 on me. So, you know, which we did not report to the college for various reasons. So here's my crew. We had over 80 people working over 4 months, and the connection to people, this is again where I was reminded that maybe my place was actually connecting people, and maybe it was getting people a taste of what it was like to do something important as a group. And I can tell you every one of these guys' names and what they're doing now, and they're fantastic people. So the scientists I work with got this great new grant, and they were like, why don't you work with us on it? And I said, yes. So we made this thing called Planet Panorama, which I'm just going to skip over very quickly. But basically, we took everything in the solar system, and we explained it on a football field. So we took all of the graduate students who, because we were paying them stipends, were forced to come out on a July day and stand on the field for 4 hours while I climbed to the top of the stadium and shot pictures. And basically what we did is, so on a football field, if this is the sun and this is like, Pluto, well, sorry, Pluto's over here, then basically the sun would only be 1.1 inches across. That's the scale. So it's like very, very, very big. Just in case, for scientific people, it's very, very, very big. And then what we also did is we researched, and we found the names for all the planets in 13 different languages, and we put them on the same thing, which had never been done before. And this exhibition has gone to 32 institutions around the globe now because of that simple language thing. And we love that. We love the idea that we can connect to people on that scale. And look at Saturn. I love Saturn. How can you not love Saturn, right? I mean, holy cow, Saturn is amazing. So the other thing we did is we actually sent out postcards to people because we were in Athens down there making this. And here's the football field for, Ohio University in Athens. And if the sun is 1.1 inches in Athens, our nearest star is 520 miles from us. That's the nearest star. So we had people actually take these orange balls that were 1 inch around and go around to various places and plop them in places like little sister stars, which I thought was kind of cool. So that brings us up to like roughly what I've been doing for the last I don't know. This has been a long time actually, come to think of it. So resonance. Resonance, let me start with this. So where I was hoarding things and where I had this really need to figure out answers to what I was supposed to be doing in life and what I was supposed to be doing that was important in the universe. That leads me to do things that are, maybe not approved in all circles. Like when you go to the library and you see that really cool photo book of all the planets and stuff, and then it's gone and someone has it checked out and isn't returning it, that's me, and I'm sorry, but like there's stacks of these things in my studio, and there's stacks of emails from the library that they're for sure this time gonna disallow me, So finally I actually decided that I should probably return them for the good children to be able to read books. And I took all the images that I had been sticking little Post-it notes to, and they made this, which was in last year's show, which was Luminous here at the Ross Museum. There's about 1,600 images of things that float in my head at any given time. So for those of you who aren't artists, this is what the inside of my head looks like. Looks like that all the time. What's in there? Well, what's in there are things like this. So I'll walk along and I'll be like, oh, Ring Nebula, that's so cool. And they're like, wow, that's millions of light years across. That's so awesomely, scientifically, fantastically huge. Mineral pool, bacterial pool at Yellowstone. That's really cool. That's awesome. Diatom, really, really, really tiny, like microns, really tiny. But look at that. It's like got orange and yellow and red and then blue and then that in the middle. And then if you go back and you look at that, that's got the same kind of thing and it's the same kind of thing. So my brain goes like, hey man, well, hey. And I don't really have a clear idea, but then I have to go make art. And that's what happens. It's like go make art or go wreck a car or something. So I make art instead because it's less expensive. So yeah. So when I started this and I started making these things, I started this new series called Chroma. And they're acrylic and they're water and they're super water-based on acrylic, on aluminum rather. And the reason that I started to fall in love with them is because they were utter failures to begin with. I was trying to paint tree rings. You know when you slice a tree and you have rings. So hopefully you know tree rings. If you don't, that's probably something you should look up. But basically, it failed completely, utterly. But in the process, after watching this spill that was terrible, like morph over a couple weeks in my studio, I realized that was doing things that I wanted to do, but I couldn't do it by trying to control it with my hand. I had to have a synergy with nature. I had to get something doing the things that happen on a larger scale in nature, but in smaller in the studio. So what I did is you can see here these like alluvial, this is the painting, this is a close-up of a painting. You can see these little reticulations that happen and all these little planes that break out and these big pools and these alluvial straits and things that look exactly like satellite photographs, but they're a part of the painting. So these are on aluminum, they're square, they're about 24 inches by 24 inches to about 4 feet by 4 feet. And this is what happens. So I go like, oh man, I'll stop with the algae and all the green stuff. I think what I'm gonna do is make a painting. Yeah, I'll make a painting. Boom, I make a painting. Yeah, all this mining, all this chemical spills is terrible. I'll make a painting. Who does not love the friggin' nautilus shells? I'll make a painting. That's what I do, right? Green stuff, what is it? I don't know, rock? Okay, make a painting, okay? So This is what this is about, because what happens is in the studio, these take about 6 to 8 to 12 weeks to dry, depending. They're laid flat, and there's a little video I'm going to show you, and it'll show you what that process is. And so when that happens, like, you're like, I want to make something that's like an algae pool, and you, the human, will be like, yes, and you'll go pick out blue and green and other things, and you'll put them on there and be like, I want the blue to be here, I don't want the green to be here, and you'll be like, yeah. You'll cover it up and you'll go away. And a week later, you'll come back, and nature, meantime, has been like, no, that's not going to happen. So what nature does is nature goes, no, what's going to happen is it's going to turn yellow, even though you put that blue in there. And you're like, oh, okay, nature, you're smarter. It's actually cooler yellow. And so it's a great release. You can kind of like sort of make these things, and then they become these like morphed sort of like awesome shapes. You can try all you want, but it teaches you sort of to kind of let go of things, a little bit of a Buddhist aspect. Very cool. Look at that one. I love that one. This looks like an opal to me. I've never been able to recreate it. I'm like, I want to make another opal. No, says nature. No, you're not. You're going to make this. Okay. Let's go make. Yeah. So this is the Chroma series, and there's like maybe about 30 of these in the series so far. Done pretty well. So toxic art. Last year, well, it's about 2 years ago, I suppose, someone approached me and said, well, we kind of need your help. We need an artist's eye to look at the stuff we're doing. I was like, okay, what are you doing? And so it turns out what they were doing is they were actually going around, and there's this, I'm new to Ohio. I'm like 10 years into Ohio, and you know, I haven't even been to Cleveland yet. I know it's a shame, but it's just like, I'm busy. So Ohio is pretty new to me. I traveled to a lot of other places, but down in Athens, you know, basically, this is a coal-fired state. It's crazy. And honestly, down here in the Ohio River, that's the world's largest concentration of coal-burning power plants in the world, in the friggin' world. It's 30 minutes from my house. This is why Ohio has the worst air quality in the country. Now, what's really happening is that all of this orange area over here, as this PowerPoint slide given to me gracefully by the engineering department. This is how engineering department makes slides at Ohio University. So, all these areas here, these are all abandoned underground mines. It's a huge area here, epic portion of the state. They're all abandoned and they're everywhere. Basically, every hill that you're going to find in southeast Ohio is hollow. And it looks like this on the inside. They took out all the cheap and easy coal. They left some pillars and things. And then what happens is when you have to mine, what they do is they extract all the water. They block it, they dam it, and they pump it out. Because it's underground, and water goes underground, and it fills up caves and caverns and things, which is where this is. So when you abandon a mine and those seals break, the mines fill up completely with water. And the water sits there for decades. And when it sits there for decades, what happens is that the water basically leaches sulfuric acid and other things, which then eats heavy metals out of the rock, which then gets dissolved in the water. Yes, scribble your notes. That's good. So, lots of different things can come out of there. One of these is iron oxide here, ferric iron oxide. It turns the rivers yellow. Sunday Creek, Monday Creek, many other things you've seen. Aluminum turns it white, essentially bauxite, right? Raw bauxite. And you can see here, this is just some of the mines that are actually like really currently polluting our streams. This is Ohio, by the way. That's like Ohio. So this is what happens, you know? Exactly what I explained. And essentially, once that all leaches out and ends up with this, which is like, you know, stuff the chemists can tell me what it is, but this is like bad stuff. Yeah, they've told me. And it looks like this when it comes out. This is what the streams look like. And this is a biologically dead stream. Nothing's living in there. Nothing's going to live in there. Not for a very long time. So what they wanted me to do as an artist, they wanted me to come in and say, the stuff that we're pulling out is iron oxide. When we pull the iron oxide out, it's the same thing that can be used as pigments in paint. Can you tell us if this is a good quality pigment? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. So what they did is actually we take the water from the stream, you add some things to it, oxidization happens, and what we're trying to do now is use air, because you can actually use a lot of chemicals to do this, but they're expensive and they're toxic as well. So we try to use as much natural products as possible. And so what Guy Riefler, Professor Guy Riefler is the environmental engineer who's actually the head of this portion of it. And we try to use air to oxidize it, and then basically the iron settles out here, and then we take the water off, and we're left with just iron oxide. And iron oxide is a pigment. Iron oxide is all this range of colors. If it's this color, you get a little bit more magnesium in it. If it's this color, a little bit less, a little more clay to it. But essentially, for 30,000 years, this is what humans have been using to make paintings. And they use it today. They use it to color brick, they use it to color ceramics, they use it to make paintings, they use everything. Raw umber, burnt umber, raw sienna, Indian light, all of these colors. But most of the paints and most of the colorants we get now come from China. And they come from places like this. This is a factory. And what they do is they take scrap iron, which often they purchase from the US, put on ships, take it over to China, put it into these pickling tanks where there's all these chemicals that eat and break down the steel into dissolved iron oxide. And then they extract that and they turn that into pigments and they bring it back on ships and they sell it back to us. Which is like, you know, what? But it's true. So what we've done is right now, these are some samples from the lab. What we're doing is we have been testing all of the orange iron oxide that we pull out of these coal-polluted streams in southeast Ohio, and we're making viable pigments out of them. And what we want to do is we want to take this and prove, and this is going to happen within the next couple of months, we want to prove that these pigments, in fact, are better than the Chinese synthetic pigments, cheaper, and that the state can, in fact, make all companies that operate in the state of Ohio buy their iron oxide pigments from us at a discount, cheaper than China, while at the same time, the money that they use to buy the pigments goes to pay for the cleanup of the streams and the employees. So it's kind of a win-win if you followed that, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to show you a short video in a bit. These are some of my students working with me. That's Professor Guy Riefler, looking very like T-shirty. And this is one of his undergrad workers. These are two people that work with me this summer. That's Asher Pollock and that's Sam Sloan. Two kids. We have to go out and collect this stuff right now, and we have to basically bust onto people's properties. And that's another story I'll maybe tell you in a little bit. So this is one of the sites is Truetown, Ohio. And this is basically what we do. There's Guy, because he had the only one with leak-proof waders. And the rest of us were like, you know, anyway, terrible. This is a very low rain day, so the river's very low coming out of here. And right up this stream right here is where it's bubbling out of the ground. This is, again, Truetown. So a lot of these places, why does it come out? Why does it come out in these streams? Because essentially, all of these areas, this is a map of a blueprint of what a coal mine looks like. And this is actually a blueprint, which is interesting. This is from Sunday Creek. So this is the area where we actually get our coal from, where we get our pigments from out of the stream. And this is a map in the 1930s of all of the coal rooms that they'd removed it. And where it's a little bit darker, that's where they've actually gone a layer below to remove material as well. And just 10 years later, here's an updated survey of this exact same mine. And you can see what they've actually removed. In 10 years, they removed all of this. This is a mountain. This is a friggin' mountain. I mean, it's insane, the amount of stuff that comes out. So what happens is when these are abandoned, and this is abandoned, and it fills with water, this is a mountain filled with toxic liquid that leaks out into the stream somewhere downstream, always. So Truetown, this is one site that we deal with. And at Truetown alone, you can see here, here's the conditions here. It's a very low pH, 4.79, 7 being neutral, right? 4.79, highly, highly, highly acidic. And then here are the EPA standards, secondary standards, not even primary standards for the biological quality of a stream. So like UGG, iron dissolved 384 parts per million, and EPA standards is 0.3. So slightly toxic stream, yes, you know, very horrible. So here's a picture. Here's us, by the way. We're up here. Hi, everybody. That's us in Delaware. And then if you drive down here, this is what I did today, by the way. So if you drive down here, right here in the Wayne National Forest, you can see all this forest growth here. This is a very hilly southeast area of Ohio, right? Everything in here is riddled with coal mines. There's not one every other mountain. There's not one 5 miles apart from another one. Every friggin' piece of land here is hollowed out. Lots of sinkholes, lots of problems, can't build there, etc. And then this little Google dot right here, that is Truetown. And at Truetown, which if you zoom a little closer, you can see all these hills. This is all abandoned coal mine. Everything under these trees. Everything. It's all filled with water. And the water leaks out right there. There's Truetown, and the water leaks out right there. So if we zoom in a little bit, there's Truetown. As you can see, it's a bustling burg, obviously. But nonetheless, here's Truetown. Right here's the seep. Here's some houses. And what happened is, about 20 years ago, one day, sort of like Jed Clampett, but with a lot less joy, essentially, all this crappy fluid started flowing right out of these people's backyard. There it is. That's the seep. See that brown streak right there? That's the creek as it comes down over here. This whole area right here is basically a big seep that bubbles up out of their backyard with this sulfuric, nasty-smelling, toxic water. So, this is a little video I'm going to try to play. We'll see if it works today. Some of you have seen this, but this is actually just a little 5-minute video of our process and some of the people involved. Yeah, it works. Maybe.
These beautiful orange streams are toxic, polluted by acid drainage from coal mines. If this pollution can be captured at the source, though, life can be brought back to these streams. Our team of engineers and artists is working to restore these streams, and in the process to turn this pollution into art. Over the last 100 years or so, Southeast Ohio has been extensively mined for coal. Many of these old mines were not sealed properly, and consequently they fill with water that reacts with the exposed minerals, forming sulfuric acid and high levels of iron. When that acid water and iron drains out of the mines, they enter streams, killing them and all of the biological life in them. Our team travels to some of the worst acid mine drainage seeps in the region to find a way to save these streams. Deceptively, as the acid mine drainage comes out of the mine, it's clear, because the iron is still dissolved and in a reduced form. We collect this water and take it back to the lab, where we will test the process to turn this iron into pigment. The collected water goes into our testing apparatus, where we can control things like temperature and pH. Our first step in cleaning the water is to neutralize the pH. We do this by adding a base, which initially turns the water green because of a reaction with the reduced iron called hydrolysis. Next, to remove the iron, we bubble air through the solution. This oxidizes the iron, turning it into an orange, slimy sludge, which is typically what we find in the polluted streams of Southeast Ohio. Now that all of the dissolved iron has precipitated, we can then separate it from the water by settling. By letting the water sit still, the solid particles settle, and you have clean, treated water on the top and concentrated iron precipitate on the bottom. The clean water can be returned to the stream, where it will no longer cause harm, while the concentrated iron on the bottom can be collected and processed into pigment through a series of dewatering and drying steps. At this point, we've taken the orange pollution from the stream and converted it into a valuable pigment.
This dried pigment from toxic coal sludge is then ground with linseed oil and a glass muller to create artist-grade oil paint, or mixed with acrylic polymers and resins to make water-based paints. My Chroma series of paintings start with a composite aluminum panel that's held steady and leveled completely flat on a steel jig. I add more and more pigment and water until right before the mass will break the surface tension. And if that surface tension breaks, the whole thing will burst, so I often use an eyedropper towards the end, sweating over each and every drop. When that delicate balancing act is complete, I cover the whole thing to keep dust and insects out, and then I let it dry for weeks, until the liquid evaporates and the temporal fluid image remains. The end results are unpredictable, and the materials and process allow for infinite variations and beautiful combinations. And in my work, I look for idiosyncratic connections between things, simultaneous macro and micro events, the compression of time and distance, the glory of our universe, and natural and cosmological processes. And this is true for supplication, which are my large-scale series of paintings of global geological dynamics and complex related systems, as well as my Chroma series, which are amorphous and strike a beautiful balance between controlled and organic processes that explore natural phenomena. And currently, all of my paintings use these toxic pigments in place of similar colors that I used to purchase from elsewhere. I collaborate with many scientists and artists, and I've come to the conclusion that scientists and artists share two critical aspects: curiosity and failure. We are endlessly curious. We try new things, and we fail often, But our failures do not dampen our curiosity. And so the artist, like the scientist, has a crucial role to perform in our society, to see things differently, to act on this vision, and to report the failures and successes to the public. In our case, my art reveals the potential beauty that can be derived from cleaning up toxic coal sludge. These pigments can be created on an industrial scale, and in the process, clean up the toxic pollution in hundreds of our streams and rivers, all because an artist and a scientist decided to think outside the norm and work around institutional walls. When citizens from traditionally separate fields come together to solve pressing problems, the toxic can become safe, the impossible becomes possible, and the ugly becomes beautiful. Yeah, I wanted to show that especially because like Justin's here, and it was nice. It was a show, right? So this is what we do, and this is the paint. We do drawdowns, we do tests, we do fantastic. All these pigments are available for any kind of painting that you want to do. The stuff from, hello, there you go, thank you. These, which were in the Luminous show last year at the Ross Museum, these utilize the pigments. These are quite large scale, just about the size of what's up here. And as I began painting all these other things with these new pigments, I began to think about a lot of other things. There's an interesting thing called constructile law, and it says it's not widely accepted by the scientific community, so my guess is it's complete like caca or pseudoscience or whatever. But basically, the idea is that objects, inanimate and animate living things, that if they're in a finite system, within that finite system, there has to be an efficiency of flow in order to keep it alive, otherwise it dies. So this system basically, once you start examining certain formations, you start to see that those systems, fractal relationships, similar patterns, they show up in a lot of different things. So the work that's next door in the 2001 gallery is this series, which is the Resonance series. And these are all 12 by 12 inches. You'll see them later. I began thinking about the leaves I've been painting and all the natural phenomena. And so one of the things that Constructall starts to talk about is like if you look at a neuron on the right and you look at a city developing from humans, that there starts to be some kind of understanding that those systems must have a relationship, an underlying relationship to something in the universe that drives them to live. So this is a detail. This is a micro detail. It's about 1/2 inch by 1 inch of one of the paintings that's over there in 2001 gallery. And when you look at this, or when I look at this, I relate it to satellite imagery of lakes like this. So I think about this, I look at the details of what I'm painting, and this is just a painting of tree bark. And when you expand and go back, that's the full painting. So I'm starting to look at all these little things that are happening and becoming much more interested in things that connect on a big level. And again, I know this goes back to that thing of like, what is my place in the universe? I mean, think about this, right? Galaxy systems, hurricanes, nautilus, fiddlehead ferns, similar shapes. I know, it's a little pseudoscience, but it's very cool. Or think about this, river deltas. This is a satellite image of a river delta, extremely similar to the human lung and air passageways, which looks very similar to this painting, which is next door. And the methodology used to make these paintings basically involves fluid between two surfaces, usually an acrylic polymer, and then I crush them together and we peel them off. And that fluid has to go somewhere. It has to have an efficiency of process. And so as that happens, it leaves these resonances, it leaves these marks, which are similar to, say, neurons. This is a neuron. And I look at this neuron, and here's a close-up of one of the other paintings that's over there. And this is a water-based natural process. This is hitting it, I'm pulling it off, and it's doing these things. And I love the idea of these systems. Same painting, pull back a little bit, pull back a little bit. And that's the whole painting. So if you can look really closely at paintings, if you can look closely at objects, you can look at the systems that are inherent to them. And this is a satellite. Here's a close-up of a painting, and here's a satellite image of a stream. Very similar in my mind. That's the completed painting. Or even ice, ocean ice. This is a close-up of one of the paintings over there. This is waterways. I see relationships in all these things. These are all from the Resonance series. They're all 12 inches by 12 inches, mixed media on panel. It's both acrylic and oil. So I won't bore you. You can come next door and look at these. I've been painting satellite images, leaf structures. This is tree bark, more leaf structures. And as I've been doing the research with my scientist friends, and I've been making these things, and I've been examining these systems, I've been thinking more and more about how local is global. This is Gavin Power Plant. This is 30 minutes from my house. This is a class 4 coal-burning power plant. And again, there's this amazing concentration down on the river. I highly recommend to all of you to go and visit the place where you get your electricity from, where it's generated from. Because at this one plant, they burn 17 barges of coal every day, 365 days a year. And the barge is huge. It's like 3 times the size of this room. So think about this. I'm sitting there, and sometimes I don't feel like I'm doing all the things I should be doing in life. Maybe I'm not doing good enough. Maybe I'm not the best father. Maybe I'm not the best professor. Maybe I'm not the best artist. Maybe I'm not doing the things that I should be doing to feed positivity into the universe. But when I think about it, this is the Monday Creek and Sunday Creek watershed areas. Very small again. Here's Athens. Here's the Hawking Athens area here. It's a very small area of Ohio, and this is where we're working to clean up these streams. But these streams that have this toxic pollution in it, they connect to all the major rivers in Ohio. And those major rivers in Ohio connect regionally to all the tributaries that eventually feed into the middle Mississippi. But that's just part of our region, and there they connect to a much larger network of all the tributaries and all the rivers that feed into the Mississippi that exits out Louisiana. Right? And from there, it's global. Once it's out in the Gulf of Mexico, it's global. So I've been thinking, this toxic stuff that comes out, the stream's dead for miles and miles and miles, but eventually that stream's run into another stream or a river, and it gets diluted a bit. So that stream might have a little biological life in it, and that stream carries on down further, and it gets diluted by another stream, which maybe has a little more biological life in it. So by the time the toxic water that exits here from Ohio gets to the Mississippi, it's going to be trace amounts, very small amounts, but it's still going to be negative. And I've been thinking, if we're going to be successful, if we can clean up water here just in a small little locale, I would rather have a small percentage of extra biological life and positivity exiting in the Gulf of Mexico than a small bit of negativity from what we've done here. And I think it's important to do that. So, proof that this is working. Al Jazeera, America, cable news station, out of the blue in July, they called up out of nowhere and said, we saw this video on the web. We want to bring a crew out from LA. We want to do a show on you. And I'm like, me? And I was like, Frank, is this you? But so, so they actually came out. They paid this whole crew to come out and film the work I was doing this summer with my 7 students who were amazing student helpers. And this is Phil Torres. He's really handsome. He's like, and he comes out and he sits there and he's like, so, why don't you tell us about your work? And I'm like, yeah, so what happens, Phil? So I don't know how the show's going to go. It's going to air November 1st. It's going to be quite funny. So this is the thing where I have a chance to reach, they have 80,000 people to view the show. That's not huge in terms of TV terms, but it's their #1 rated show. And who knows what can happen from there? Who's going to give us money? Who's going to come out and support us? Can we get more work, right? Or, much to my surprise, to my very big surprise, a friend of mine asked me, he was like, well, I'm involved with the Rotary Club in Nelsonville. Can you come and do a talk at lunch? And I'm like, oh, I don't know, man. I think I'm busy all those Rotary days. But it's a good friend. I have many good friends. I'm like, oh, okay, sure. So I go to this Rotary Club. There's 4 people, and they're sitting around this table, and you say the oath and all the stuff. And I do my talk, but they don't have any AV stuff, so I'm kind of just doing pantomime, the stream, I'm like, oh. So I walk out, and I'm like, well, that went well, And then about a month later, I get a call, and the guy who was at the Rotary Club, it turns out, is friends with Senator Lou Gentile. And so he actually coerces Lou Gentile to come to my studio in Athens. So he visits my studio in Athens, and I explain the whole process to him, and I show him the paintings. And right now, I can't give you a lot of details, but right now, just from me being a dork artist making work like this and talking about it, we have a chance within the next year to have a coal company that's sitting on hundreds of millions of gallons of contaminated water pay for a pilot plant with our process to actually clean up almost 1 billion gallons of toxic water. So local is global. I take this to the classroom. I take it seriously. When I run classes with my students where we actually have to go out in the community and do things. This is a sustainability sprout we did, which is quite funny. We actually built this whole thing, and we made all the students at OU, where I teach, come down, and they actually had to sign pledges on leaves of how they're going to be more sustainable. Lots of things like, don't use condoms, shower less. But there are other good things that came out of it. I know. And so these students that I work with at OU, the students that I work with and train this way, they start to understand that they have something that's really necessary in the world, that they are important to the world. And so a former student of mine, Sasha Shrem, started a school in New York because art education in the public system is absolutely atrocious or non-existent. And so she actually started a after-school program called Scribble Art Workshop, which was basically to get art in kids' lives again. And she runs this, and I train my students, and I send my students to New York. This is in Inwood in Manhattan. And in 18 months, she went from 1 location to 6 locations. We have over 300 students right now, and we're about to go national. We have many cities across the country that are asking us to open up Scribble Art Workshops. We teach from 18 months old to 80 years old. We'll take anybody. And our classes are not about art. You're not going to be tracing your hand making some turkey for Grandma Thanksgiving, okay? We actually take the kids in there, and we teach them to trust their instincts. And we have the parents in there with the young kids, training them to let their kids' creativity flow. And this is giving back, and this, I think, is going to change things. In fact, just a couple of months ago, Sasha and Scribble Art Workshop, they actually won Arts Incubator of the Year for the city of New York, which is great. Look at this badass. Look at this kid. She's like, yeah, She's awesome. At the end of every term, we sell the work. We have shows in local businesses and in little museums, and we sell the work. The kids sell their work, and every single dollar that comes from the sale of this work goes to scholarship for the kids in the area, because it's a very mixed neighborhood who can't afford to go. And so we have a great deal of diversity there. And I think that this is one way in which we can really, as a small thing in a small place, that local is global, it's going to change it. So last little bit, and I'll get you out of here. Okay, this is the part where I've been thinking out loud, and now I'm going to talk out loud at you, so apologies in advance. I hate politics. I don't care what you think you are. I think your party is probably crap anyway. I think all parties are crap, which is why I like this poster. I think it's really good. And so a lot of times my students, the thing about you, and you guys are students in the back row, I don't know, he's probably still asleep, but nonetheless, most of you, the thing that you do for me that I like a lot is I come up and I'll be like, blah, de, blah, blah. And in the back they'll be like, oh yeah? What are you doing about it? And I like that. I like being challenged. Yes, it's scary sometimes, but I like it. So my students always challenge me, yeah, but what can we do? Because oftentimes when I discuss these things, talk about my projects, they're like, what can we do? Can you help us? What can we do? So one of the things that has happened very recently, and I wanted to mention this, is you guys know Occupy Wall Street. You know what happened there. Zuccotti Park, a bunch of rich kids that didn't have jobs wanted to go down to Zuccotti Park and make a lot of noise because they were sick of not having jobs. Right. Yes, that's humorous. So basically, out of that, though, came a lot of really good things. One of the things that came out that I think you can deal with directly is, for the first time, we really understood what the power that was inherent in social media and in the ability of your generation to be able to capture it in a way that no one else could see. Right? Because out of Occupy Wall Street, we got Occupy Sandy. When Hurricane Sandy came through and put all that storm surge and wiped out all those things on the East Coast, FEMA was there, yes. Red Cross was there, yes. But they were not that effective for those people on the ground. The effective relief for this whole situation on the ground was from people from Occupy Wall Street who understood how fast you could mobilize people by using social media and by using on-the-ground eyes and the immediacy of what could happen with that, right? They got food to people, they got help to people, they got shelter to people faster and more efficiently and to the point where it was needed. Not a massive bunch of trucks with things, and those are needed. Don't get me wrong, they're very needed, but not the same way as someone who's in a house on a roof who needs help. And that's the power that your generation holds in your hands right now. Just last week, right? Flood Wall Street on Monday. Wear blue in solidarity. The biggest climate march in history in New York. Almost 400,000 people. These are basically the same organizers as Occupy Wall Street. And they arrested the guy in the polar bear suit, which you remember this. Which is pretty I think they just screwed themselves with this. Now you're thinking to yourself, yeah, marches are great. And I agree, marches are fun, they're great, and you just leave, and what happens afterwards? Well, interesting things. I don't know if you saw last week, but basically, as the climate march was happening, the Rockefeller Foundation pledged that they were going to divest from fossil fuel industries all of their funds. That's huge. That's millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars that they're going to divest from fossil fuels. That's a watershed moment. Remember that moment. And that was brought about by you. That was brought about by your generation going out and doing these things. You can have an effect. We need you. Do you guys know Strike Debt? Strike Debt is an organization, again, that came out of Occupy Wall Street. Some of the people that were already involved in finances and bank out of this, they started Strike Debt, and Strike Debt began something called Rolling Jubilee. Rolling Jubilee was a way to eliminate debt, with the idea that debt was enslaving us in American culture, and it was basically a product of banks and treating us unfairly in many, many ways. So what they do is they collect donations, $5, $10, a buck, whatever you have. They collect donations, and they go onto the debt market, and they buy your debt for pennies on the dollar. If you had to pay it off, you'd have to pay all of it off. If you owe $1,000, you got to pay $1,000 plus interest. But on the secondary market, banks and other financial institutions can buy your debt for pennies on the dollar. And then they make money trying to collect it all from you, but they only paid the bank like $50 for your $1,000. So far, what Rolling Jubilee has done is they have collected enough money that they actually paid off $15 million of other people's debt and just sent them letters and said, your debt is gone. Great, you say, but I'm a student, and I'm in college. And as we know, college students, college loans cannot be bought on the debt market, cannot be forgiven until you die. Sorry to bring you down a little bit. But here's the thing. Just last week, they did it. They went after private schools. And they used donations from people that you do not know. And they paid off college loans. A particular kind of loan, yes, but college loans for people who went to Everest or these kind of online rip-off colleges. You know what I'm talking about, right? This is people. They're just like you. This is not a bank. This is not a political institution. This is just people like you that are very loosely organized around things that you are expert at. You are expert at social media. You're expert at getting together at a moment's notice. Boop, boop, boop. Meet me at Frank's. Boom, you're there. I don't know why Frank keeps coming up, but he's an important guy. So, what could you do, right? You're just here at OWU in Delaware, which is really hard to get through because 23 is a mess. And you're here, and you're sitting in an auditorium with a lazy-eyed bastard up here, wasting your time. What are you going to do? What can you do that's effective? What if in the next week you started texting all your friends, and every college student in America with debt of any kind, from the government, from loans, or whatever else, what if every single one of you decided on a moment's notice, because you're connected in the way that you are connected and you can use that system the way you can use it, what if you decided to all default on your loans at the same day? You would own the banks. You would own the banks. They would be like, because you owe over $1 trillion. Do you know that? Over $1 trillion. What if you're like, yeah, not going to pay it, all of us. And if you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. And we're not going to pay it until you give us a fair system. If you did that, I guarantee you, this would be the year that you would have affordable, fair loans. And you wouldn't be saddled with debt when you go out and get a job. It's not going to happen in a political system. It's going to happen with you. Local is global. You can have an effect. Don't forget it. This can happen for the environment. This can happen for watershed maintenance. This can happen for everything. It can happen this way. It's happening this way. So if you're wondering what you can do anything. So I want to leave you with a quote. This is from Clarissa Pinkola Estes. She has this great thing. It's this wonderful little thing called Letters to a Young Activist During Troubled Times, which is really awesome. And this is kind of why I ended this way, and this is how I think. This is her quote. Ours is not the task of fixing the entire world all at once, but of stretching out to mend the part of the world that is within our reach. Any small, calm thing that one soul can do to help another soul, to assist some portion of this poor, suffering world, will help immensely. It is not given to us to know which acts or by whom will cause the critical mass to tip toward an enduring good. What is needed for dramatic change is an accumulation of acts, adding to, adding more, continuing. We know that it does not take everyone on earth to bring justice and peace, but only a small, determined group who will not give up during the first, second, or 100th gale. When a great ship is in harbor and moored, it is safe, there can be no doubt. But that is not what great ships are built for. Thank you.